Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest Sky Vodcast. This is episode number 22. We've been coming at you thick and fast. I hope you've been enjoying what we've been putting out during this lockdown. I'm delighted to say, joining myself, Anthony Davidson and Johnny Herbert for this one, the other side of the world, way down under, is the race director, Michael Massey. How are you, Michael? It's, midnight with you?
It is midnight, but no, it's fine, Simon. Having to join the pleasurable company of yourself, Ant and Johnny, what more could one ask for at midnight on a Friday night in lockdown?
What more could any girl or boy ask for at this time? Michael,
exactly.
How's things down under? Because obviously we left it, everything was, exploding worldwide. How's it been down there?
Honestly, the cancellation of the Australian Grand Prix was probably the catalyst for everything here. So, we within a week after the Grand Prix, we went into a version of lockdown, let's call it. We were fortunate enough that the restaurants all stayed open and cafes and so forth, but only for takeaway and things like that. Everyone was, most people were working from home, schools closed and so forth. But thankfully, things haven't been too bad. All things considered, looking at a lot of other parts of the world, we've been very, very fortunate down here.
Yeah, I mean, there's been plenty of challenges for everybody, be it the teams, be it the TV companies. How's it been for the FIA with everything that you're trying to put in place across all the different series? What are the challenges from your perspective?
For the whole of the FIA, it's been and like, as you said, any other business, I think, or any other individual, the same challenges have applied. The FIA has two offices in both, one in France and one in Switzerland, along with staff in the UK, Switzerland, France, Germany. Like everyone, remote working has become the new norm. And getting through that, I think by the end of this, all of us will be sick of Zoom, Skype, WebEx, and every other possible known means of having chats. But it's allowed us to work and actually work quite efficiently along the way and get a lot of things done. So, it's been a challenge in one part with all motorsport essentially stopping near on overnight globally. But having said that, it's allowed us to get on with some exciting things, and more importantly, focusing on the last probably 8 weeks, what the return to racing actually looks like.
Yes, leads me on to that question, Michael. How's it going to be when you eventually get to a circuit? How can you envisage the FIA working and the teams as well? What kind of protocol is going to be in place as far as you can imagine or see it?
Anth, it's been a hugely detailed process. So we've had our FIA medical department involved as a core element, along with other members of our safety department. I've been leading the operational side of what that looks like. Our travel, internal travel people, and all of that. So it's been a whole of organisational effort. And then with F1 being a key part of what we do, working in partnership with Ross and Steve Nielsen and Chase in particular, on what that looks like. But it's effectively the key elements of what we're looking at will be each team and each sort of main entity will operate like a family unit. So no different to each of us at home with our family members, and that we can socialise with them and work with them and so forth quite closely. Effectively, each team will be a much broader family unit. But the other parts that we're aware of, and the way this pandemic has evolved, is that social distancing, teams interacting will be something that we won't see. Trying to keep separation, even things down to drivers' meetings having to happen over exactly this forum, over Zoom, so that way to try and minimise the risk for the entire paddock and to try and keep us as resilient as possible in going through and not having a repeat, or minimising the risk of having a repeat of what happened in Melbourne.
And Michael, obviously you're the main man who has to organise everything for when we finally go racing. How difficult has that been? Obviously Austria is going to be our first race. How has it been, your sort of dynamic with the Austrians, trying to sort out the circuit, for example? Because track inspections obviously are going to be that much more difficult now.
They are, but thankfully the team at the Red Bull Ring and Project Spielberg have been amazing to work with. They have had a desire from day one to make this happen. They have always had, I think, as the three of you are well aware, a can-do attitude at the best of times, and they have been brilliant. Everything that we've needed, required, and working with the Austrian government to make this happen, and without them and their support. Of both the FIA and the F1 group, the target of Austria on the 5th of July is becoming more and more reality by the hour.
Yeah, which is good news for everybody. What do you think that we've seen football gradually starting up? Obviously, the Premier League now is back on the 17th of June. It's quite eerie, isn't it, when you see these stadiums and everything played behind closed doors and how it affects the atmosphere. In fact, I saw a rugby league game from Australia earlier, and it sounded like they were piping in crowd noise into it. But from your perspective and from the FIA's, how's it going to be, do you think, going back to work without the fans on site?
It'll obviously be a different environment. And I know exactly the rugby league game you're talking about because I was watching it last night. And they did pipe crowd noises in to create that atmosphere. But having said that, yes, it will be different. But from what we do, particularly in an operational and regulatory sense, it won't really have a great deal of impact. We'll still have all of the officials and marshals trackside. None of the safety elements have been compromised in any way. We've been working on plans of how marshals can continue to do what they do around the track and everything safely in the best environment, ensuring they have a good testing regime similar to everyone within the paddock. So, it will be different. There's no doubt about that. But I don't know it will affect or impact the way we as the FIA do things. It will be more the other elements that come into it.
Michael, so we saw a few new or potential new venues on the calendar for this year. That time has been and gone, of course. It seemed maybe a bit of a race against time. Now that time has gone on, would it have been possible to were they finished in time, the new tracks that were proposed? How far along did the program get before lockdown and for you to actually be there in person?
Well, as you and I have been lucky enough to do a couple of trips to Zandvoort late last year and early this year, and they were well and truly ready. There was no doubt about that. They put in a huge amount of work in a relatively short period of time. And I think it was Max did some parade laps around there earlier in the year. So for them, that wasn't an issue. Same with Vietnam. I actually stopped into Vietnam earlier in the year when I was coming up to Europe in late January, early February. And again, that wasn't going to be an issue at all. That circuit was well and truly on the way. So with the new venues, they were well and truly prepared and ready for Formula One. And it's a disappointment with Zandvoort that we're not going to get to experience that this year. But we'll see. We'll have the Dutch fans will have 2021 to look forward to.
How did you manage to do any of this kind of interaction with the guys at the circuits in the meantime, or did the communication stop?
No, it was mainly phone calls and emails. There wasn't really any need for video chats, but between phone calls and emails with both the Vietnamese and Zandvoort, that continued all the way through, and even still continues to this day, just with a little finer bits and pieces that they're looking to do along the way. So it's not something that's stopped per se.
Michael, obviously one thing is when we do get final kickoff, one question I always get asked about is marshals. We hear about teams, we hear about sort of the TV companies going, the FIA, etc. Marshals, how are you going to organise the marshals to be able to be doing their job at the Grand Prix that are coming up in quite a close proximity to each other?
No, exactly. So one of the big ones is obviously with anything, each of the marshals at each of the posts, let's call it with the flag marshals and those immediately around them. The plan has been for some of those to operate in a similar manner as a family unit or as a cluster. in other areas, and purely because it's just physically not possible for them to do their job and socially distance in the appropriate manner. The other one will be that they'll have the appropriate and required protective equipment, so be it with face coverings and gloves and so forth to protect themselves and those around them. And then with all of the various vehicles, be it medical vehicles, fire vehicles and so forth, they will continue to operate as they traditionally were. Just however, if they're not on standby or so forth, they'll be told to get out of the car just to give them as much space. So it's the level of detail and thought that has gone into sort of every aspect of how this works and what it looks like to make sure that we can deliver a safe event has been huge and is ongoing. There's been many hours put into it by a large number of people so far, and many more to come before we get there.
Michael, we had, a question that came my way quite often from the fans was, well, it'd be great to see the races, one driven the clockwise, the normal way round, one anti-clockwise on the same circuit. I tried to explain, but could you explain from a FIA safety point of view why that wouldn't be necessarily an option?
I did have to have a giggle when I saw some comments about some circuits going to run backwards, and I said, interesting. But no, basically all of the circuits, as you're well aware, Ant, have been designed, and all of the safety infrastructure is designed, be it the walls and all the flag posts and everything, around the cars running in a certain direction. So even when it comes to the openings that you have, that if a car breaks down, whatever the car gets pushed back into, if you're running the opposite direction, you're effectively running into a blunt wall. So in its simplest form, whilst it would be nice to have circuits that run both ways in some areas, it's a much more challenging task and would involve moving flag posts, literally changing walls at places. The amount of work would be astronomical to make it happen. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, so if you're one of those people back at home who's been asking Anthony that question, if you want to keep annoying him, just keep asking the same question.
And I completely,
I'll just play this recording.
I completely encourage that. Anyone that wants to annoy Anthony, they're most welcome to.
Michael, right, what's the best part of your job?
The best part of my job? The people. Everyone that I get to work with, from my immediate team at the FIA to working with all of the teams, be it team principals, sporting directors, drivers, team members. I can say, and not just because I'm talking to you, you guys aren't too bad to work with either. But no, the best part of it is the people. And I've always said that I've worked in motorsport my entire professional life, and it's nothing without the people. We're all passionate about the sport, because I always say that you have to be a bit not normal to work in this industry or be involved in it, but you have to be passionate about it. So certainly, enjoying something that I do, it's a sport that I am passionate about. But yeah, without doubt, the people.
And what about within the drivers and the teams? Obviously, your position taken over from the blessed heart Charlie Whiting, but respect is something that you need. You do seem to have got that. What's it like, the relationships you've got with the drivers and the teams?
Yeah, I think you touched on it, Johnny, that, following Charlie's footsteps, those shoes that would never be filled and will never be filled was certainly a huge, huge challenge. But respect is something that's earned with time, and you just sort of build that up. My first part is I want to be true to myself, and I don't do things that I personally don't believe in. But on the other hand, being relatively new to the way the Formula One world worked, it's getting an understanding of what everyone's expectations are to a degree to form your own opinions. And you will always form your own opinions, but I think gathering information and background on certain things is critical. For me, I haven't had that point of reference when you go through any sort of succession planning element or handover in a job, that you can ask the person saying, okay, how did you go about this and how did you go about that? So part of it's been the discovery process along the way. But I've also been very fortunate that everyone's been open, welcoming, happy to share information, even when it's to their own detriment. And we know how competitive the world of Formula One is. Just to say this is the way it was and this is the background with some things. So it's, it's been good. But as I said, respect's not just handed out. It's something you have to earn and earn over a period of time.
Certainly not at the top level of motorsport. I mean, I'm interested though. We ran a piece on Charlie Whiting in the last year, I think, before he died, and it was just on the way that he'd managed to develop the relationships with the drivers. Because I think one word you cannot ascribe to a driver is selflessness. They are inherently selfish. So you're gonna get them rotting like stags as well, aren't you too? How do you manage that? Who are the difficult ones to manage? Who are the easier ones to manage? Does it go hand in hand with longevity in the sport and success? I should imagine those at the top of the game might be a bit trickier than those at the just starting out.
Put it this way, I can actually say that, like anyone and any elite sportsman, and I've worked with quite a few different drivers in various series, as a group, you can tell the games that they like to play and the mental games that they like to play when they're in a group environment with each other. And that's part of, and I think Ant will tell you straight off, and as will Johnny, that's part of the gamesmanship of what they do. They are all elite sportsmen, and part of that is the mental game that they like to play in that group environment when they're all together. One-on-one, when you actually sit down with them privately and just need to have a chat one-on-one, they are all great. And that's quite honestly, they're all quite open, say it as it is. We can agree to disagree at times, but very respectful. They put their point forward, I put mine forward. And, in some things we can find a compromise. So, no, I think you're being a bit harsh of saying the elder statesman and things like that a bit more prickly. I think that's actually far from the truth. But yeah, at the end of the day, they are all in a super competitive environment. And as someone put it to me the other day, you have 20 alpha males all sitting in a room together. There's it's a cocktail for the right environment to come out of things like that. But it's fun. It's actually fun to watch when you're sitting at the front of the room in a driver's meeting, watching them all, and you can see sometimes the mental games that some of them are playing within each other. It's quite entertaining.
So you got your 20 alpha males lined up in Austria going into turn one, very race rusty 20 alpha males. How are you going to manage that from your point of view, from your standpoint? How, we saw a bit of a gloves off approach handed to the drivers, especially at the end of last year. Is that going to continue? Are you going to be a bit more lenient on them, expecting a few more scrapes here and there, especially in the first race? Because usually we see that in Melbourne after just a few months off of racing. This is going to be something, I think for me, this is uncharted territory. I've never seen such a long period of drivers out of action before.
I think you're right, Ant. If you look at it overall, and I've seen a number of the media comments from a lot of the drivers, and I don't think any of them have ever been out of a car or cart or anything else for this long ever, since probably before they arrived into the sport. Going back to Austria, I think it'll be and more of a continuation of where we were with the let them race principles towards the end of last year. But, I can't see anything changing dramatically. And at the end of the day, as you're well aware, we have 20 best drivers in the world they're in Formula One for a reason. Whilst they may not have been in a car of recent times, I don't think that's going to have a great deal of impact on their capabilities and going through. But no, I'm as excited as anyone else, for the start of the first free practice session in Austria to get motorsport back underway. And I think that's something that we're all thriving and looking forward to seeing because it's something we've all missed.
And one thing, Michael, obviously drivers are one thing. the teams are something completely different. I know when I did my little bit of stewarding, or I remember the radio communications that Charlie had to deal with. How do you deal with the amount of messaging that comes your way in a qualifying session, but more importantly in a race? Because we hear a little bit on the TV, but it is so much information being thrown just at you.
No, it is. There is a lot, and then you have your sort of relatively quiet races, and then you're thrown to races such as Germany last year, where our radio panel lit up like a Christmas tree constantly. So you just sort of have to, thankfully we've got a prioritization queue automatically ticked in, so the next one sort of literally like a call center flashes up to you, and you just deal with them one at a time and as best as you can. Some of it you've already seen, some of it there's gamesmanship in it. Some of it is quite relevant, and as your time as an FIA steward, Johnny, you have to sort of sort through all that and sort it out and see what's actually truthful and what's got some merit and what is actually just play on, boys, and get on with it.
I wonder, Michael, before you go, I just wanted to ask you about the raft of changes that are coming in. I don't know about the other guys on this call, but I, for one, am excited about this performance balancing. I think, I think a lot of the smaller teams are happy they're going to be able to close the gap on the bigger ones with that, the aero handicaps, the engine freeze, the token system. How involved have you been with the decision-making process on this? And what do you think it means for the sport for you going forward?
Hugely involved. So this process really started let's put to aside the huge changes that were originally for 21 that have now been pushed back to 22, which was a decision that was made collectively between the teams, the F1 and the FIA. But with all of the changes that have been brought about for next year on the technical side and so forth, there's effectively to split up the FIA tasks. There's myself, as well as my race director role, looks after the sporting elements of Formula One and the entire single-seater pathway. We have Nicholas Tombassis, who I understand you'll be speaking with next week, who's the head of technical matters, and then the newly introduced, or relatively newly introduced, role of financial regulations and Federico Lotti. So effectively, we've sort of got the three pillars that each have an area. But I'm quite excited by it. I think that the introduction of the financial regulations as a result, the budget cap and the lowering that has come about of that figure that was announced on Wednesday is fantastic for the future proofing and trying to ensure the long-term sustainability of the sport. And it's a critical pillar and something that I'm excited to see with the aero tapering that's happened from first down to 10th. For me, that's like a draft system. I see it in different football codes and so forth over here. And I actually think it will be, I don't know that we'll get the full value of it in the first year, but I think in the second year and so on, I think it'll actually be a really good thing for the sport to compress the field and bring us back to some of the good old days. I think, at the end of the day, the cream always rises to the top. But if we, as a sport, can have 20 cars that are far closer together on a technical differential, that for me is only huge benefit to deliver exactly what all of our fans and what we want to see, which is good, hard, close racing with as many people involved as possible.
So in terms of, Michael, the simulations that have been done so far, I know that's ever changing. We talk about the performance side of things, and that's really good. We all want to see the cars able to, like you say, closely follow each other without the turbulence, the wake, the ill effects of the slipstream. But in terms of the safety elements, you must have been involved in that, and how's that kind of shaping up as well?
No, and safety is one of those things that never stops, Ant, that we're always learning. There's new materials, new processes, new equipment that comes in. So some of the enhancements that will be made to the 2022 cars, such as extra tethers in different areas, and some other systems that we're working on behind the scenes that aren't quite out there to improve safety and visibility for everyone involved. There's some exciting stuff happening with everyone at the FIA, and it's been possible because of the collaborative nature which we've brought about in recent times, which with F1 and the FIA working so closely together, we only even jointly have finite resources. But during this lockdown period, we've had each of the teams working on various projects on behalf of the FIA and F1 for safety improvements or different areas of things that we're looking at. So it's actually been nearly a blessing in disguise, you would say, with what's happened overall during if there can be, with the COVID era that we've been working through.
Yeah, I was going to say, with regards to this, it's almost like the situation has played out and maybe helped get these changes through. Is that what you mean by that? As in the circumstances
No.
here, it's not a normal situation, but cost cutting is something that everybody's going to have to do. We're looking at look at Renault, look at McLaren, look at Williams, and what's going on with them.
I honestly think, Simon, that this has certainly accelerated things. This is something that none of us in our lifetime have ever seen. With overnight, the world came effectively to a standstill. You only had to look on your flight app radars and so forth, and everything was clear. So for me, it was the catalyst, but there also had to be, a will, and everyone within the teams, the FIA and F1, worked together to pull this forward. Like, it's been one of the saddest things that we've ever seen, the pandemic that's been before us. There's no doubt about that, and everyone's just had to have a bit of a reset on where they sit, and where the industry sits, and trying to do the best that we can with the situation that's been presented.
Michael, thank you. It's a great pleasure to have you come on and talk to us. I know it's late there, so we'll let you scoot off to your bed, and hopefully see you in Austria in a few weeks' time.
I look forward to seeing you all face to face, socially distanced, in Austria. But no, it's been a pleasure chatting to the three of you, and look forward to seeing you in hopefully about 4 weeks' time.
Fingers crossed. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, gents. Have a good night.
Great stuff. I'm just going to pick up with you two, if I may, with regards to some of the other headlines from this week. And I mean, obviously, the new rules is something, and we can discuss that again in detail with Nicholas Tombazis, who will be on the vodcast, the actual F1 show on Monday, to explain exactly how that's going to affect things going forward. But Anthony, Johnny, the worrying news out of Williams, partial or even the full sale of the team. They went from operating profits to operating losses. Obviously that's down to a lot to the just in terms of the commercial inabilities that they've had over the last couple of years. So what do we think for them going forward? Do we think there's going to be a buy? I mean, they've got great heritage, but who's looking and sniffing around, do you think? Anthony, can I start with you?
Yeah, well, like Michael was just saying, Simon, it's, this time that we're in has accelerated things. It's pushed the fast forward button, hasn't it? And I think teams that were potentially struggling in the past without any racing, this is from what I hear, it's a hand-to-mouth industry. Yes, there's a lot of money that floats around, but there's a hell of a lot of money that gets spent as well. And if it's not an industry that can just stop overnight. So yeah, I think we're learning now why cost cap was coming along, why Ross and his team were concerned by it, and why there had to be action. So it has pressed the fast forward button on everything. And unfortunately for some of the teams like Williams that were potentially struggling before, it was only a matter of time, really. In this, the Formula One isn't exempt. It's not immune to what's going on around the world, and lots of businesses have gone under. So look, it's an attractive team. It's a great team with a lot of heritage, like you say. I'm sure they will have a buyer. I'm sure they'll be fine. But one thing's for certain, F1 has to get racing again very soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, the last thing we want to do right now is kick any team when they're down. But I suppose they will have to look internally to see whether operationally they've made and commercially have made some bad decisions over the last few years. I don't want to point to anyone at all, but it was the fact that they didn't align themselves closely with the manufacturer may be problematic for them. Should they perhaps have gone down that way when you look at the other teams' models?
Yeah, well, I think it is something that seems to be sort of working for others on that side of things. Everything Racing Point looking very good in the winter set testing. So you're right that on that side, Simon. They've been a bit unlucky, I think, a couple of years ago when they had that very, very poor car. That really didn't help them after they'd had a little bit of a sort of a rise in performance, and then it sort of went very flat last time out. And it's something that is very hard to get out of. I've had a relationship with Lotus in a very similar position. To attract those new sponsors is much harder when you're fighting at the back of the grid, and that is the position they're in. Did these budget sort of caps go far enough? You know, I know Williams and I think McLaren were very much trying to push it down to, I know Zach Brown said that 100 million mark, and of course it's nowhere near that in many respects, and of course it will affect the bigger teams less with that slightly bigger budget that we're going to be seeing come our way. And I think it's still something that they're going to find very, very difficult to get to that type of budget anyway. Most of them are sort of around that 100, 120 20 mark as it is. So it's a very difficult thing, but I hope the infrastructure that they have at Williams does give them that opportunity to attract the right people to push them in the right direction, get them back into winning ways.
I guess when they were associated with BMW, people might have looked at that and said, that's the time when you should have sold to BMW. You know, you had a manufacturer there. They were keen as anything to stay in Formula One at the time. They were spending the money. They had the fancy motorhome, which is still, their trucks at least are still left over, I think, from those times. But no one's got that crystal ball. And what if they did sell up at that period? Because BMW quickly got a bit tired of Formula One and left. And we would be in the same situation again. So, you know, they wanted to hang on to their own team. At that time, many people thought it was the wrong thing to do, but actually, as it turned out, it might have been the right thing to do. So it's not an easy thing to judge and balance. But talking about the cost cap, if you go too far, you will have lots of redundancies. And that's another thing that the industry can't have, really. So I think that's why they're having to strike this balance between the cost cap to help the smaller teams, but not hinder the bigger teams too much in terms of people's livelihoods coming into it.
Well, the title sponsor contract has been torn up, as we understand, with the immediate effect. So it's no longer Rocket Williams Racing. And on the subject of headcounts as well, if you think about what's going on across the board for McLaren at the moment, I think it's 80 from the race team. Renault as a group, 15,000 job cuts. We understand there will be a bit of a cull at Red Bull. There might be a cull at Mercedes too. So this is going to affect everyone. It's going to affect all businesses. I mean, one positive, I suppose, to come out of it is despite the cutting of 15,000 jobs and the new CEO at Renault, Clotilde Delbos, saying that that's how they're going to shave €2 billion off their budget. They are committed to the future of Formula One. That's good news. One of the manufacturers who we're worried about are saying that they're going to stay. Johnny?
I think that still shows the power of F1 because, you know, Renault have been in it many years. They've sort of ducked in and out, been very successful in that early turbo years, and of course latterly with Red Bull and Sebastian Vettel and those world championships they've got. So they're very important, key to F1. But Renault themselves in Paris know that the success that hopefully starts to come their way will pay dividends around the world in the car sales because it's all about that technology, selling that technology. And one team, I think, has utilised it absolutely brilliantly and has made the car a much more sexy young car is Mercedes-Benz. And it has definitely, through F1, been able to make that brand sexier.
There's another angle to look at this as well, guys, that F1, there'll be lots of people out there saying, yeah, you know, it's just a sport. We've got to be careful in these times, blah, blah, blah. But it's F1 almost stands alone in this point that it's more than just a sport, as Mercedes and Brixworth proved. during these times. You know, the F1 teams and suppliers' capabilities of turning their attention to a multitude of different avenues is essential. We need these brains and we need these super factories out there as a sport, first and foremost. But then in these kind of weird times, look at what they're capable of. And I think this country, many other countries around the world, benefit from having such incredible teams and facilities and brains out there that can create breathing apparatus, for example, at a blink of an eye, something that, you know, lots of other industries couldn't achieve. So I think that's why we need to be proud of our sport and be careful not to cut the costs too much, because you know, there are these super factories there in the waiting for times like these.
Okay, last one, which I don't think I need to get comment on, but obviously this story is still doing the rounds about Toto Wolff, his future, whether or not he's going to be stepping down, whether or not Mercedes are going to cease to be a works team and potentially become Aston Martin Racing. What is the relationship between Stroll and Toto? Daimler and Mercedes have moved to say, look, the speculation is unfounded and it's irresponsible. Yeah, for the moment, they're saying there's nothing in it. Okay, so we'll leave it at that for the moment. But it is a story that is refusing to go away at the moment. But there we are. Johnny, Ant, plans for the weekend? Is the garden looking spectacular up your way, Ant?
It's doing pretty good. The ceanothus is in full bloom now. It's just about caught you up, you Londoners. I don't know how yours bloomed so early.
Mine's already, you know,
it's already dying off, isn't it?
It's already going off. That's what happens. That's what happens.
I've been loving you too, watching you with all these pictures of this lovely blooming flowers in your gardens. I am not interested in that at all. So there will be gardening for me coming this weekend. No interest in planting flowers.
Okay.
Well,
the horses have gone. There's nothing else for you to do. You might as well garden, Johnny.
Maybe I should.
Well, enjoy your concrete jungle up there, Johnny.
Just AstroTurf is entirely. People at AstroTurf, I don't understand it. Anyway, that's it. That's your lot. We've got Nicholas Tombazis, as promised, on the F1 show, 2:00, Sky Sports main event, and Sky Sports F1 on Monday. Thanks to the lads. Enjoy your weekend at home. From us all here. Bye-bye.